The Pursuit of Happiness. Based on true events, The Pursuit of Happiness tells the story of Chris Gardner, a highly extroverted, sociable, and assertive individual, his wife Linda, and their son, Christopher. Chris is a family man who struggles on a daily basis to make ends meet. This constant strain of financial pressure weighed heavily on his marriage, which caused it to end, resulting in Linda abandoning Chris and her son. Chris is now left to fend for the both of them. As desperation rises, Chris has everything going against him, but he never gives up on the hope that his hard work and determination will pay off. As a newly single parent, Chris continues his search for a better paying job using every fiber of his skill. After having left a lasting impression on one of the top officers of a prestigious stock brokerage firm, he eventually lands a spot as an intern. However, this was an unpaid internship, whose potential long-term payoff would be grand, but would also add to Chris's short-term financial struggles. After due consideration, Chris ventures into this new opportunity, hoping that this will result in a promising future at the firm. Without a financial cushion, Chris and his son are evicted from their apartment and later forced onto the streets. Regardless of his struggles, Chris pushes through his trying times and comes out on top. Chris is offered the job at the end of the internship, and he is finally able to provide for his son, which is what he's always wanted. Forward into the future, Chris went on to develop his own multi-billion-dollar stock brokerage firm and was very successful in his life. Analyzing the movie further, we see that organizational behavior topics are present. Self-determination theory explains that Chris's motivation is autonomous. From the very beginning, it is apparent that Chris is autonomously motivated due to his relentless attitude. This is demonstrated through his unwillingness to give up on his seemingly failing business venture with the phone's density scanners. After having been told no countless times, Chris remains confident that these setbacks pose as an opportunity for him to explore, learn, and actualize his own potential for the future. Next, we take a look at goal-setting theory. Goal-setting theory states that specific and challenging goals and feedback contribute to higher task performance. In other words, when goals seem difficult to achieve, people tend to persist in trying to attain them. Chris's life was not easy, yet he still set challenging goals for himself, which demonstrates his persistence in attaining them. With all the constraints present in Chris's life, this led Chris to perform a discrepancy reduction, which forced him to change his behaviors to be more productive in a shorter working day. Throughout the entirety of the film, Chris demonstrated high self-efficacy. Chris truly believed in his ability to perform any task at hand. This was most apparent in the scene where Chris and Dean Witter Reynolds' manager, Jay Twistle, shared a cab to the suburbs. While Chris was explaining to Twistle how he would be of value to the firm, Twistle was preoccupied with trying to solve a Rubik's Cube. Frustrated that Twistle's attention was divided, Chris knew he had to do something radical to wow his audience. He owned his proactive behavior and proposed that he would solve the Rubik's Cube in the time it took them to arrive at their destination. Upon completion, Twistle was astonished at how quickly Chris was able to manipulate the Rubik's Cube. This left Twistle with a lasting recency effect, resulting in Chris's callback for the internship. There are, however, solutions and recommendations that could have been implemented that would have aided Chris in achieving his desired end result sooner. When referring to the 5-factor model, Chris possessed many of the beneficial qualities, except for that of conscientiousness. He was often careless and extremely impulsive. A proposed solution for Chris would be to apply the self-regulation principle, to learn from past experiences in order to adjust his behavior for the future. A second recommendation we would offer to Chris would be for him to be aware of his self-serving bias. He would always take credit for his successes, whether it be providing for his family, being a model father, or eventually earning himself an internship with Dean Witter Reynolds. Yet he denies his failures, blaming doctors for his lack of sales, authority figures for seizing his money for his lack of payments, and his wife because she wasn't strong enough to stay. A solution to this would be to admit to one's failures. It is impossible to develop oneself without improvement. With self-serving bias, we struggle to identify problematic behavior or characteristics that could be improved upon. Perhaps the greatest mistake Christopher Gardner made was that of adopting a long-term plan approach while pursuing extrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation does not imply outstanding performance in the long term. It is a short-term motivation. Individuals seek short-term objectives in order to get their desired rewards. Chris should have instead adopted an intrinsic motivator. With this, he would have had a better plan, been more committed, and been motivated because he wanted to do it instead of having to do it. A similar recommendation would be for Chris to implement the equity theory. This theory compares the inputs one puts into a job and the outcomes received in comparison to others in order to determine job satisfaction. With equity theory, Chris would have been able to observe the vast difference of his inputs and outputs, perhaps leading him to pursue a different career sooner. Finally, our last recommendation to Chris would have been to rearrange his hierarchy of needs, include goal setting, and adopt telecommunicating sales. It is proven that significant positive correlation has been found when the more each lower level needs are satisfied, the more the next higher level needs are satisfied. In conclusion, Chris's impulsive behavior, long-term approach, coupled with his extrinsic motivation and lack of goal setting was a recipe for a difficult life struggle to success. The same success could have been accomplished by selling the scanners or adopting another job if the aforementioned solutions and recommendations were implemented. That being said, Chris's life struggle would not have been that difficult if he managed a more conservative behavior, admitted his self-serving bias, adopted a short-term approach with the appropriate motivation and goal setting. Indeed, Christopher did take risks, however, they were not calculated. With luck and persistence, he was able to overcome numerous obstacles. There are paths to success and failure for everyone, and the difficulty of those paths depend on the decisions you make. Thank you.